We're up to Birkas Hanehnin, Beis halacha hey. And if you're following along from the Siddur, which is recommended you do so, it's page 417, about 10 lines from the bottom. In tonight's Shiur, finally we're going to learn about that which we've been talking about till now. Till now we've been mentioning that there's certain types of breads that are different than other breads, that it's not common for people to make a fixed meal on it. And that's what changes these breads in halacha, that unlike other breads, that you're making them hamoitz and birkas hamazon, these breads, you're making it mezoinus and alamichya, except unless if you make it into a kvi yisuda, which we spoke at length in the previous shooting what that means, and then it turns into hamoitzi and birkas hamazon. But we never spoke what these breads are. They are those kind of breads which in English could go by a range of different names, cakes, cookies, there's a bunch of different names these breads are called. What are these breads that are initially mezoinus, but if you eat what we call a kvi yisuda, then it turns into hamoitzi and birkas hamazon? What are those breads? And the Alter Rebbe is going to enumerate from this halacha onwards. In this halacha, the Alter Rebbe is going to start mentioning there's 3 types of breads, and later we're going to see there's much more. It starts off with 3, but it moves to all different types of breads, and what's the common denominator between them, the distinctions between them compared to regular bread, is they're not made for people. Most people don't normally make a meal on these kind of breads. They don't fix their meal on these breads. But the way it says elsewhere, Einoi Soyed Halev Kalechem Gomer, it doesn't have the same characteristics, the same properties of satiation the way normal bread has. It does satiate, but not in the same way. And not in the same manner. And therefore people don't normally fix a meal on it, but sometimes people do. Now the distinction between these breads and other breads is either in the texture, or in the ingredients, or in the filling, or in the thickness, which is related to texture somewhat. What instrument is used? Is it an oven? Is it a stove? Is it a frying pan? All of these things could have some bearing, and as we'll see in the actual halacha. But before we start the actual halacha, just an introductory comment that what's difficult in this particular halacha compared to many other aspects of Birkas Hanehnin is we're talking about actual foods. And once we start talking about actual foods, on the one hand, yeah, it brings things closer to home. On the other hand, we're talking about foods that some of us have never heard of. Some paper over here, sorry. I guess sometimes it's no good to come prepared. 1 second. Just had a piece of paper over here.
Inside your paper.
That's not this paper. This one. So what's difficult here is that we're talking about certain kind of foods, which none of us necessarily know what these foods are. Just by way of example, if we'd be talking about knishas and berekas, so none of us would have to give a description what that means. Because everybody around this table, imagine most people around this table knows what berekas are, knows what knishas are, and knows what kokosh cake is, and knows what wafers means. But if somebody's going to be reading the text that we wrote right now and discusses kokosh cake, tell me what this is. Don't give me a name. How does a name help me? Okay, so Baruch Hashem, today everything is digitalized, and therefore everything that you write the word kokosh cake, you could Google it, you'll know right away what it is. Even 1,000 years from now, you'll know what kokosh cake meant 1,000 years ago. But when we start talking about the traditional foods that are around in those days, there's a lot of lack of knowledge, to the extent that even amongst the Rishonim and the Achronim, they disagree what these foods really are. Even the Gemara, they're disagreeing the definition of what certain foods are. There's a particular food called teresa, which we'll talk about soon. And the Gemara itself, before we get to Rashi and Tosfos, gives no less than 3 interpretations what that food is. And now that we're standing many years after that, what are all these things? for example, you learned the Gemara the word lachmanis, which was the very first item mentioned in this halakha. So Rashi says lachmanis is ublash. Ublas. Says Tosis, no, ublas, that's mama's bread. It must be nilis. No, now I know what I'm talking about, right? It's not ublas, it's nilis. It's nilis, ublas, or niblis. And to make it even more confusing, sometimes the Rishonim use a certain word, and some people say, no, it's a mistake. It's not ubli, it's supposed to be niblius. So now we have a range of foods that we don't know what they mean. This particular Gemara, more than other Gemaras, in case Mevarch in the Sugya of Birkas Hanehnin, has a range of girsois, ranging from chayevet b'chala to pturim in achala. So the Gemara says it's exempt on chala. The Gra says no, it's a mistake. It's supposed to say chayeves. And it's not only the Gra. A lot of Rishonim say it's a mistake. It's chayeves. They say chayeves. So some Rishonim are lacking some of the words that we have in our Gemara. Some of them Rishonim are Pashut cutting out an entire passage. You take this particular Gemara, the Sugya that we're talking about right now, the types of food, and you look in the Rif, the Rosh, and the Rambam, which are the three key authors that the Mechaber, the Shulchan Aruch follows, every one of them has a whole different way, not a different shitta, a whole different mahalach, a totally different approach trying to understand this Gemara. So it doesn't make life much easier for us. So my suggestion, when we learn this Gemara, is not so much to focus on what the particular food is, because it's impossible to know what that food is. And after we learn the Alter Rebbe on this, and the Alter Rebbe is going to bring the various shittas, don't ask the question, so which one is lachmanis and which is truknin? Because we're never going to know which one is which. At least we should know the principles, because the principles are going to assist us a lot. What's lachmanis, what's truknin, what's trisa, no idea what those things are. But at least we should know what the principles are, because the names will keep on changing depending which shitta you go according to. The Bach, which the Alter Rebbe follows a lot in Seder Birkas Hanehnin, not in the Shulchan Aruch and not in his Luach, but in the Seder Birkas Hanehnin, he modified a lot of his positions in accordance with the Shittas HaBach. The Bach says on this sugya that because this is something which is dependent on Chilukei Girsois, by way of introduction, the Tur explains and says his a particular opinion, and the Beis Yosef right away says, "What? There's a mistake in the Tur. It doesn't make any sense." So we have to reinterpret the Tur and say that it means something totally different than what he really says. And he writes that even though this is a Doiche Gadol, he says Hamoitzi really means Mezainis. Nothing means what he really says. But otherwise, the Tur doesn't make any sense. The Bach comes and says, no, you're pushing the Tur and squeezing his interpretation so far away that it's impossible that he would have meant that. So the Bach says, we're going to actually interpret the Tur in its literal sense. But we're going to say that his Gemara says something different. And the Bach concludes, and this is the point that I want to make, and he says that since this is a subject matter which is dependent on Chilukei Girsois, that it has to do with what text you have in front of you, therefore, Avdina and Hachal Chumra V'Hachal Chumra, we're just going to be machmer all across the board. So some things we're going to say, this might be really mezainis, and even if you make a full meal out of it, it might be mezainis. So don't be a chacham making it a moitzi, even if eat kedei sriya might be mezainis. And then we might twist the pendulum to the other, swing the pendulum to the other direction completely and say, this might be really hamoitzi even without making a full meal out of it. So we have to follow, this is a way how to get out of all these problems. The way to get out of your problem, take a real piece of bread, the formal old-fashioned type of bread that we know that's called bread, lechem gomer, eat a kazayis of it, and now you're in a meal. Once you're in a meal, things become totally different, now you don't run into shilas. I'm mentioning this as an introduction because things might sound complicated, but I'm actually trying to simplify things than they really are. And again, we'll mention once again what we said a number of times in the previous halachas, that the word lechem we find in the Torah in two other areas. In fact, when it comes to benching, the Torah doesn't actually use the word lechem directly. Chazal understand, and the Torah says, "V'chaltu savatu v'rachtos," referring specifically to lechem and not to other foods. But there's two other places where the Torah, two halachas where the Torah uses the word lechem specifically. Rephrase that. It says lechem in regards to one of the foods in Eretz Yisrael, but it says a list of 7 different types of foods, and one of them is wheat and barley, which you make out of it lechem, and you use the word Eretz HaShaloi v'Miskenes Toichel Ba lechem, next week's parsha. But it doesn't say clearly that the mitzvah of benching is specifically on lechem. But there's 2 other mitzvahs in the Torah which actually use the word lechem. V'hoyo ba'acholchem ilechem ha'aretz, we eat bread of the land of Eretz Yisrael, you need to give hafrashas challah, which we do in Chutz La'aretz also, but it's not on the same level of obligation as it is in Eretz Yisrael. Mitzvah challah, which is only from lechem. And then there's another mitzvah in the Torah, lechem oini, which is the mitzvah of matzah. And as we'll see in all these halachas, and it keeps on coming up, and in this halakha, Al Rebbe says it pretty clearly, that these things might be considered, are considered, all these strange type of breads, are considered lechem for challah and for matzah. So they really have the properties of bread, but they're somewhat different than bread when it comes to hamoitzi and birkas hamazon. Because hamoitzi is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, min ha-Torah you don't have to make any bracha before you eat. And birkas hamazon, unless you're really full, unless it's a kvi yisuda, is only d'Rabbanan. The Torah only says v'chalta v'savata. So the Chazal, when they came to give their type of benching, which was when you even need a tiny bit, a kazayis you have to bench, and when they gave their rule of hamoitzi, they insisted on a higher status of lechem. Only the type of lechem that people normally use for a meal. But when it comes to eating a full meal out of bread, a kadesh svia, kvi suda, or when it comes to challah and matzah, of course these things are called bread. They're bread, even though they're made slightly differently than regular bread. How is regular bread made? Primarily, the 2 primary ways they make bread is A, you take flour and water, mix them together, and you knead it. So it's meant there's the ingredients and what we do with the ingredients. That's shasa gilgul, the kneading. And then the second thing is we bake it in the oven. And if we're going to change one of these aspects, either it's not going to be something that you knead, or it's not something that you bake in the oven, that starts moving it away from the regular formal type of bread. Let's see inside. Halacha Hey, page 417. The Elu Hey Mine Lechamim. These are types of bread She'ein derech b'nei adam l'kvoi yisur aleim, that people traditionally do not normally make a meal out of it. What are the types of bread? Lachmanius, utlukonin, upasaba b'kisonin, or the way it's commonly known as b'kisnin. And these 3 breads are mentioned that way in Shulchan Aruch also in different order, but the same 3 breads. But what's interesting is that the Alter Rebbe in the Luach says 4 breads: Lachmanius, Truknin, Pasaba b'kisnin, so far they're all Chinese, and Trisa. And here in this say that he revised his opinion, and he put Teresa as one of those breads that actually are really mizonos, even if you make a meal out of it. So here's an unusual case with Alter Rebbe in the Seder became more lenient, if you can call that lenient, took something which in the Siddur, in the Luach Birkas Hanehnin and the Shulchan Aruch, he considered a food which is mizonos, but if you make a meal out of it, it's hamoitzi and benching. And over here he says, no, it's really mizonos. But we'll wait and see, then he'll say there's a second opinion. The real primary difference in the Luach and the Shulchan Aruch is which opinion is the primary opinion, which opinion is the secondary opinion. We're still stuck with the problem that we don't know what's what, as we'll see when we move on. So these are 3 types of breads, and these halachas we'll talk about. Pasaba b'kisnin is a subject for itself. It's an halacha Zayin onwards. Zayin moving on till halacha Tes. Zayin Ches Tes talks about the food Pasaba b'kisnin, and that's very much related to our mizonos breads and to our sponge cakes and many other, and crackers and many other things. That's going to be Zayin Ches Tes, which I'm afraid we won't touch tonight. And halacha Hey and Vav will talk about these breads called Lachmanius and Truknin. Let's see what they are. But before we see what they are, I'll just say the Nekuda. The Nekuda saying in here is this bread, when you finish making it, going to be a thick bread or a thin bread? Now note, we're talking about flour and water. Now people are already going to say blintzes, pancakes, And the Alter Rebbe actually used the word blintzes over here and used the word blinis, which are typical word blintzes is used in modern day English already today. But don't use the word, even the Alter Rebbe used the word blintzes, don't confuse that with the blintzes that we know, because everything has changed. The Alter Rebbe is not talking about if you fry things, he's talking about if you bake them. There's no frying going on over here. And certainly not deep frying. Well, if you fry lightly, that you just smear the pot, you just don't want the pot to burn, that's not called frying. But if you put a bit more oil, that's called frying. And we're also not talking about that you mix a bunch of chazarai into your food. We're talking about plain flour and water. No oil, no eggs, no spices, no sugar. Plain flour and water. So to find that in our diet is very difficult to find, unless you're moving to Yemen. Matzah, of course, yeah. Unless you're moving to Yemen, where they have all different types of foods, which are made very plain, simple foods, and that's what they ate. And we'll talk about some of those Yemenite foods which have received some type of revival over the last few years in Eretz Yisrael. We'll get to that. Crackers is going to be connected more to possible the kistan as well as matzah. Let's see inside. Lachmanias. What is lachmanias? Hey mine lechamim dakim. They are thin breads, virakim, and soft breads. The word soft over here, by the way, does not mean that the bread itself afterwards is soft. That's not what it means, although it probably is going to be soft. It means the texture of the dough is a soft texture.
Before it's baked.
Before it's baked. When you took the flour and the water and mixed them together, it was what's called a thin mixture or a soft mixture. V'loi ova, not a thick mixture. In a lot of areas in the halacha, we have a distinction between blila raka and blila ova. Starting from Hilchos Shabbos Losh, when it comes to kneading on Shabbos, making salads, mixtures on Shabbos, the difference if it's a thin mixture or a thick mixture. So here the Alter Rebbe says this type of flour and water you put together, you put it in a thin mixture, not a thick mixture. Now, how do you define thin and thick? Soft and heavy. So the Alter Rebbe's definition for a thick mixture is ke'isas lechem gomer, like a dough which is made out of proper bread. Haniloishom is galgelis biyodayim, which is kneaded and rolled. Bread you need to knead, you need to roll. You need to take your hands and start rolling the dough, because it's a heavy dough, it's a thick texture. Ella, rather, this is made k'isa sivgonin, a dough which is called sivgonin, which is a spongy kind of dough. Sivgonin is a type of food which was mentioned in Mishnayos Masechtas Challah, and there's a debate what that means also. But in any event, in relation to what we're talking about over here, it means it's a type of dough she'iyef shalagalgal biyadayim, that you can't roll with your hands. But the Alter Rebbe doesn't say, but that itself, there's two madregas, and that we'll see later on. One madrega, so we know the dough that bread is. Bread is you actually have to knead. And what's called today in Ivrit ugat shmarim, some people call them yeast cakes in English, but it's not a very common name. But there are certain cakes that are also made, but cakes come with other things. They have fillings and they have sugar and they have chocolate. But I'm talking now just about the texture of the dough. Kokosh cake, for example, is made with a proper dough. So certain cakes, what's called yeast cakes, they're made with a proper dough. So that's a proper dough like bread. Then there's a dough like a batter, like cakes. Now in batters we have two types of batter. We have a batter like cake, and then we have a batter which is a pourable batter like pancakes. And in pancakes there's different types of pancakes, we'll talk about that also. But a batter like eggs. Like when you make your egg, I'm calling it batter for lack of any other, just to like you pour the eggs into the frying pan and it's a liquid. So you have a batter which is a liquidy pourable. Here the Alter Rebbe doesn't tell you what he's talking about, but as we'll see later on, that at this stage, the Alter Rebbe did not make a distinction. At this stage, it's okay if we understand what the Alter Rebbe is saying, that it's not a dough-like batter, it's not a kneading, a dough-like that you need it. It's a batter, even if it's, in other words, a cake batter, which is, you need to use a spoon to mix it, and it's not mamish fully pourable, that's called a blila raka. So you have this type of dough, this type of batter, which is flour and water, and it's not kneadable. And what do you do with it? Va'afa b'taner, you went and baked it in the oven, so it's mamish like regular bread in the oven, but the batter is not dough, it's batter. Oy b'machvas b'li mashka. It doesn't have to be an oven. Because in halacha, although it does make somewhat of a difference, but generally speaking, the definition of baking, cooking, or frying has nothing to do with which utensil you use. Has hardly to do, rephrase that, almost nothing to do with what utensil you use. It's in relation to kashering, it's that way, in relation to afresh challah, in relation to many, in relation to basa b'cholov. It has to do with how it was prepared. If it's on a frying pan, beli mashka, without any liquid, that's called baking. Definition of baking, or call it roasting. Roasting is usually with an open fire. That's really a big difference. But baking means if there's no liquid used, then there's a certain amount of liquid which is called cooking, and there's in between amount of liquid which is called frying. We're going to learn more about that later on, but for right now, no liquid means baking. A lot of liquid is called cooking, and in between is called frying. Again, that's the simplification purposes for right now. But for the purpose of what we're talking about right now, it's sufficient to say that you can put it in a frying pan. It's a non-stick frying pan, which they didn't have in those days. But you put it in a frying pan and you didn't put in any liquid. And if you don't put in liquid, that's called baking. But what's the distinction between this and regular bread? That it's not, you don't need it. You don't have to roll it with your hands. So when it comes to Hilchos challah, it's chayiv b'challah. When it comes to Hilchos matzah, you can make a brach. You could make a brach al achilas matzah. You the mitzvah of matzah. It's called lechem oini. But when it comes to hamoitzi and birkas hamazon, when you're not eating a kviyas suda, when hamoitzi and birkas hamazon are only the rabbanon. Since most people don't, when they want to sit down and have a meal, most people, they want to have real bread. And they don't care if in Hilchos challah it's called bread, and Hilchos matzah it's called bread, and it's mamish a lechem gomer in those areas, but it's not a lechem gomer in the world of eating, in the eating world. Why is that? Yeah. So, well, I'm not talking about... No. Well, I'm not talking about matzah right now. I said in regard matzah you need. Matzah is a regular dough. This is a type of food that if you would make matzah out of it, it would be considered proper bread for alachilas matzah. So, hamoitzi lechem, lav dafka. Yeah. But when nobody's eating this kind of matzah, the matzah that you have... You can understand what I'm saying. Okay, let me move on. So this is called bread and Hilchos challah. It's called bread and Hilchos matzah, but it's not the type of food that people make a meal. Why don't they make a proper meal on this? The Alter Rebbe says later on in Halacha Zayin that when things have a different type of texture, when it's a belila daka, it doesn't have the quality, it doesn't have the property of being soyed halev. It doesn't have the ability to satisfy you. Well, the Alter Rebbe says ein is soyed kol kach. It doesn't satisfy in the same way as normal bread. You eat bread, you become full. You eat a bread which is made with a texture that's not kneadable, it's not the same thing. And that's going to be, by the way, that's the key issue over here all the time. Why do people not make a meal on all these other kind of breads? It's not the same soyed alev. It doesn't have the quality that the pasuk says, lechem levav enosh yisod. It's somewhat soyed, it somewhat satisfies you, but not in the same way. And because people don't normally make a meal, lo yitiknu levarech hamoitzi birkas hamazon. Remember that hamoitzi birkas hamazon was something. Hamoitzi is midrabanan, and even birkas hamazon, if you didn't need a full shiur, is also only midrabanan. So Chazal never made the rule to make a bracha hamoitzi and benching on something which people don't normally make a meal. Ela bayrim min mezainis amein shalosh, only mezainis an alamicha. Unless eating a shiur. Once eating a shiur, which we learned previously with the shiurs, then it's real bread. I don't care if you made your dough is not the same kind of dough. In halacha, it's called bread, and you ate a kviyas suda. So that Chazal not going to stand in the way of a deraisa. But when it comes to when you're not full, you ate a small amount. When it comes to hamoitzi as the first bracha, Chazal said, you're not full, okay, I'm moitzi, but I'm not going to make you make that. In the Gemara we have, by the way, about one of these foods, not the one that we just mentioned, but one of them, the one Amoida said, this is not nama, This is not bread. Guvla b'alma. Guvla, it's some kneading. Some mixture. It's a mixture. It's not bread. What does it mean it's not bread? It is bread. It's bread in Hilchos Chal and Hilchos Matzah. But in Hilchos, how you feel in your stomach, it's not really bread. So therefore we call it lechem gomo in Hilchos Chal, we call it lechem gomo in Hilchos Matzah. But in Hilchos, Birkas Hanehnin, we call it lechem she'eino gomer. And I don't know, like I said, I don't know if you're going to find this ingredient in the store. It's not very common to have an ingredient which has nothing else, everything like bread, except for that you don't need it. Crackers have another. Crackers has another element that it's crackery, and crackery, the very fact that the texture is a crackery texture, is a whole separate reason why it might become a mezainis. Here we're talking about something which is not crackery. It's dough-like, like a pita. Whether like a pita, like I don't know exactly what, but it's not like a cracker.
No, but the wrap is needed.
The wrap is needed. The wrap is needed, but later they make it very thin. Well, no, we're talking about something which you don't need. It's a batter. It's not a dough. I believe so. I can't imagine. I have to be. So I don't know if you'll find this in the store, but this is L'Shei Mitzvah's knowledge. Let's move on in Halacha Vav. And we'll soon come to things that we do know. V'chein truknin. If you want to say al pidik, we'll call it trukanin. There's another type of food called truknin. The first food was called achmaniyos. It seems like they used to put it into a regular oven, or they put it into a regular frying pan that had a edge around it. You'll soon see why that makes a difference. And the difference, and the only thing that made lachmaniyos different at this stage, and all the names and the meanings will change as we finish the halacha. Everything will move around. But for now, the difference was that you don't need it. Now we're talking about something that the way they used to make it is sheboilin kemach b'mayim b'lila raku yosef medai. They would take flour and water and mix it, what's called yosef medai. Way too much, way too thin. Way too thin means it's a horrible batter. So the Tzemach Tzedek points out right away over here and says, ignore the words Yosef Medai. That Yosef Medai is how they make it. It doesn't have to be Yosef Medai. The critical item here is not the fact that it's a horrible batter. The Tzemach Tzedek points that out in his Chidushim because that's going to be the second opinion we're going to learn later on. So again, I don't want to confuse you, but for right now, okay, it's something that happens to be a pourable batter, but if it wasn't a pourable batter, that wasn't the issue over here. This was the same idea as before, that it's a batter. That's the main thing. Makes no difference if it's pourable or cake-like batter. Elo sheshoif notoyer guma v'cholol shebekira. Their stoves, which were made out of mud or earth, which was outside, they had their stoves. Well, not exactly fancy the way our stoves are. Sometimes you would have a hole, a hollow spot, where there's a slant to the earth, thank you, where it slants down into where the food could all collect, like a small a drain. But it wasn't a drain, but that's the same look. So you pour it into that hole, call it a hole for lack of any other word, and what happens is when you pour it in there, so even though it could be pourable, it doesn't have to be pourable. It could be pourable, and when you pour it in there, it lifts, it becomes quite high and quite thick because there's no place for it to move. So it's in a small, very, very small, tight spot in that hole. The purpose of, by the way, making these foods are to prepare. Why do they make these foods? To prepare quick lunches. So they never knew of the invention called mezainis bread. They knew something called quick lunches. Whether it was mezainis ha'motzei, they're going to learn about. And the way to make a quick lunch is a dough you have to knead. It takes a lot of time. I'll make some you don't have to knead. An oven, you know what it means to heat up the oven, to get the wood. I'll find a spot I can pour it into this small hole, and it'll heat up over there. It won't have to wait for the whole. It goes much quicker. Oitaner, or it could be in a hole which is either in a stove or an oven. It does become slightly thick after baking. Now the difficulty over here is it doesn't tell us how much is thick and how much is thin, what's the measurement, what's thick, what's thin. But this food is slightly thick, but it is a batter. So on the one hand, it's a texture which is not a dough texture. It's already a reason to be mezainis. On the other hand, it does become somewhat thick.
I mean, after the cooking.
After baking. You have the same idea what people use in a frying pan, but they pour a lot into the frying pan. So if you pour only one layer, it'll be very thin, but if you pour a lot into a frying pan, it'll become very thick. One of the key distinctions between pancakes and cake is, there's a lot of distinctions. But one of them is, pancake is very thin. I'm talking thin pancakes right now, and therefore bakes very, very fast. And a cake, you have a tray. The tray has corners, has sides, and allows the cake, when you're pouring in the batter of the cake, even if you have a pourable cake batter, but you have some cakes which are pourable, but it rises to a certain thickness because it's contained in the machmas, in the baking pan. Until it becomes slightly thick after baking. Which in traditional old-fashioned Yiddish was called blinis, which is somewhat like thick pancakes. So this is another food which is a mezoinus food, but at the same time it turns into hamoitzi. It's not rollable, it's not kneadable, but it is somewhat thick. Even though this one, it seems like they poured it. It doesn't have to be, but it could even be something that you pour. So it's not only you don't need it, you can't even, it's mamsha liquid. But since it becomes somewhat thick, so therefore if you have a kvi yisuda, it's mezoin. If you have a kvi yisuda, it turns out it's mentioning. Let's look at something that has ala chisroinus, which has all shortcomings. What if a person doesn't pour it into the hole in the stove? This person's looking to do a very quick, fast-paced cooking, baking. So he takes his entire batter, which it says here was a pourable batter. Like I said before, that's not the critical. Now it's going to soon become the critical item. He takes his batter, he pours it all over the floor of the stove or of the oven. And sometimes they would pour it outdoors in the sun, which the Gemara says that is one of the options. Now the floor of the stove has no borders like a frying pan, so it has space to move. It pours all the way out. So if its final texture, when it's finished baking, becomes very thin. And this is the item which is called the Gemara trisa. This has no shame lechem. So in Hilchos challah, you don't have to be mafresh challah because it has two chesroinus. Both, it's not a normal dough, it's a batter. B, it doesn't even have any thickness to it. So that's nishtahi nishtahed, it's not bread. If it's not bread for challah, it's not bread for hamoitzi, because that keeps on going, being the theme all across. That is a correlation between challah, matzah, and benching, with two distinctions. One distinction that when it comes to benching, in order to, if you're not eating a full meal, in order to make, then you don't make hamoitzi mix hamazon unless it really satisfies. And one other distinction, which is not mentioned here, but I'll mention it already in passing, that in challah there's another element, and there could be foods that change over different stages. He starts one way, finishes another way. In challah we take into account what happened when shasa gilgul, when you start making the dough, because that's the zman achiv of challah. When it comes to hamoitzi mix hamazon, we take into account also what happens at the final stage. And this is not called bread at all.
How is this different than the first one?
Not really. Well, let's finish the halacha. We'll see that in the end there's really no difference in anything. Let's see. Let's finish.
Is this much different than the first case you mentioned?
This case is very different. That it's both has two disadvantages. It's both a batter and not a dough.
That was the first one.
And the second thing is, so that's one. It's very thin at the very end stage, and therefore it's not considered bread. Therefore it's mezainis and ala micha afilu kavos adasa eleh, even if you make a full meal.
The first one wasn't thin at the first.
You know, I said right at the beginning that there's going to be everything, all the the scriptures are going to become very difficult because in the end everything's going to be the same. It's just an issue of names.
There's an Indian bread called chapati.
You know, if you don't mind, let me just finish because almost all the questions will be answered when we finish. Ein mevarchen aleh ela b'yim mizaynis. Oh, really?
Yeah, it's missing. Yeah, no L.
Oh, no, it's a mistake. Vein mevarchen aleh in the siddur, it's a mistake. Ela b'yim mizaynis. It's obvious from the context.
Yeah.
You make mizaynis and alamichya. Afilu kavos sedasa aleh, even if you made a full meal. V'chein. In the luach, by the way, this is Yeshaya. And the next opinion is the main opinion. This one just reverses them. But whatever. Just again, you see, the Alter Rebbe had modified his position on a lot of things. Somebody takes a batter which is a pourable batter, and he pours it into a frying pan, but it's a very, very wide frying pan. Why isn't it good? It's a wide frying pan. Same idea, because then it will spread. It's not about if it's a stove, if it's the floor of the stove or it's a frying pan. Before we used the frying pan, we meant the frying pan that has borders. And now we're talking about a frying pan that either has no borders or it happens to be so wide that the borders don't really matter. In Karba Mincha, we have a difference between Marcheshes and Machvas. It depends if it has borders, because that determines the texture. Muspashet, the Shamal Shula Machvas, and it spreads down on the floor of the frying pan. The Nasa Dak Moed Gal Macharafia. And even after baking, it remains thin. Shekoid and blintzes, what's known as blintzes, which is pretty similar to our blintzes, other than the fact that your blintzes has fillings. A, B, the dough itself has other liquids, not only water. So that already changes everything. But imagine you would make a boring type of blintzes and sell your blintzes as the most boring, tasteless blintzes, which means plain flour and water, no fillings, just the way it is. Then that's what we're talking about. Ein kvias me'elas b'em k'moi b'trisa. You can make a kvias from today to tomorrow. It's a similar idea as trisa. It is not trisa because trisa was made on the floor of the stove and this is making on a frying pan. So Chazal spoke about specific foods that they had in their days. And that's when we keep on asking what's this, what's this, what's that, it's very hard because everything keeps moving around over here. But there's no halacha of kvias suda in this type of pancake so far. So the foods that become thick towards the end, there is a din of kvias suda. But something which is both a batter and it's thin, then there's no kvias suda. However, v'yesh cholkin. It's one of the most dangerous things in learning Shulchan Aruch in a set amount of time is that you stop in the middle of halacha before the v'yesh cholkin. Baruch Hashem, we could do the v'yesh cholkin today. Or in Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, the Ba'amed Dvarim Amurim, which happens 10 sifim after v'yesh cholkin. Some disagree. And that's the shitta of the Tur, the way the Bach explains the position of the Tur, the Bach and the Magen Avraham. Well, it's a combination between the Bach and the Magen Avraham. V'oimrim, she'trisa mevarchen aleh amoytzi birkas hamazon b'shir kvias suda k'may b'truknen. They say no. The whole halacha was based on, is it going to be thin at the end or thick at the end? And this opinion says no. Even if it's thin at the end, I don't care. Kvias suda, you make a moitzi birkas hamazon. And it's connected with a different girs in the Gemara and a different shot in the Tur. And the minute you have a different girs and a different shot, all the halachas change. Yes, lachas shel devreihem, shloi lechel shir kvias suda, kim shivarach hamoitzi alechem gomer tchila. We should take into account this opinion, even though it's not the main opinion, that al pi din me'ikra din, no such thing as kvias suda. It's mezainis gomer. It's not bread for chal, it's not bread for anything. But there is an opinion that says that if you make a meal out of this, it also becomes a moitzim birkas hamazon. So don't eat a shear of the meal. Ki im sheyivarech hamoitzi lechem gam etchila. And your solution for that would be, go take a normal piece of bread, real bread, make hamoitzi, and then you can eat to your heart's content trisa, a pancake which is a thin pancake, the tasteless pancake we're talking now about. In the luach, it's the other way around. Everything is this is the main opinion, this is a secondary opinion, but the bottom line stays the same. The bottom line, whichever the luach Alter Rebbe says in one way, and Seder says it a different way, just the two opinions, he reverses the order, But the bottom line is it remains a question whether if you have a Kvi Suda, if it stays a Mazoinit, which is the main opinion, or the secondary opinion that it turns into a Maitzi also. Even this might turn into a Maitzi. So eat it in a meal, but the Alter Rebbe doesn't say it, which is interesting. And he says that in the Luach, normally we always add, when you say eat it in a meal, we have to add another very important criteria. Eat it in a meal, lemazon v'soiva. Don't eat it as a pleasurable item in the meal, as an after food, as a dessert. Eat it as a food that's going to fill you. I mean, the guy is eating a Kvi Yisuda over here, a sheet of a Kvi Yisuda, but he might be eating a sheet of Kvi Yisuda, li'idin v'tainen. In the Luach and the Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe says, you should eat it b'toich ha'suda l'mazon l'soiva. Here he doesn't give that qualification. It could be the Alter Rebbe wasn't worried about it. The main concern the Alter Rebbe was that the person is going to run into a shaila of Birkas Hanehnin, which is a shaila of a deraisa. He will be benching anyhow, so I'm not concerned about Birkas Hanehnin. What bracha should he make before? If I'm not worried, it's a suffix. And the Alter Rebbe says later on that anything is a suffix, you don't make a bracha in a meal. Because of the suffix, because maybe that Moitzi covered it, maybe it deserves a mazonis. It's a suffix, I don't make a bracha. I don't care about that. I'm not worried, you won't make a bracha on it. But what I care about is that it should be covered by benching. So if you're having it in a meal, I'm satisfied. Now the Rebbe has a order on this halacha. I hope we'll be able to say the Rebbe's order and finish the next opinion. And then we'll have a maskana. The Rebbe's order here is based on the Chaim Noah's order. That Alter Rebbe, if you look carefully in Seder Birkas Hanehnin, when he goes through all different steakers, and you should be careful if you want to eat a Kvi Yisuda. Sometimes it says if you want to eat a Kvi Yisuda, and some says if you want to eat Kedei Svia. So the Rebbe writes, Ba'alacha Yud Gimel Yud Al Tezvav, if I remember the numbers of the halachas, it says Kedei Svia. And here it says Kvi Yisuda. Explains the Rebbe, it's one line, and the Rebbe's mamish one word. But it's the Rebbe recorded for himself the Chaim Noah's others. And then the Nekuda the Rebbe says over here, Kedei Svia means if you are full. Kvi Yisuda no means a shiur that we learned earlier, a shiur which you make in Hamoitzi whether you're full, a real Kvi Yisuda. So Kedei Svia is a chumrah that you make even if you're full. Sometimes a shayla, you might have to make Birkas Hanehnin, you have to take another piece of bread. I'm not worried if you're going to eat Kedei Svia. I'm worried if you're going to eat a shiur of Kvi Yisuda. Because Me'ikar Adin, this is really Mezainis Gomer. It's Mezainis even if you eat a full meal. That's Me'ikar Adin. So first of all, we have a spek. First of all, it's most likely it's Mezainis. And second of all, if you're full, this is machlokes. If we go after you, we go after everybody else's shiur. So the main concern is we're going to eat a full shiur, not if you're going to be full. Okay, let's move on. We'll try to finish this. Yesh machmir moed, and some people go a stage further. Once we learned that there's a shitta that says that Teresa, the thin texture, the thin batter and the thin texture, the one that has all the disadvantages, we learned that even that could turn into a moitzi according to one opinion. So some say that according to this opinion, we got to go a bit more strict. Loimar, shloi nosnu chacham yishir kvi yisud levarach hamoitzi o Birkas Hanehnin betruknin el kshavlila sahisu raki yoysim edai. That the previous foods that we said that you're making in hamoitzi if you kavei yisuda was only because it was a pourable batter. But if it's not pourable, even though you can't roll it, you have to go and mix it with a spoon because you can't actually pour it. And you baked it with the oven and with the frying pan with hot liquid, everything that we said before. This Yesh Machmir, which is a whole new opinion, says that everything that we learned before, forget. And in order that something should be a shaila of lechem sheina gomer, half a moitzi, half benching, half bezonis, half a moitzi, depending on how much you eat, was only if it was a pourable batter. It had to be a pourable batter. Before I said Alter Rebbe was not telling what kind of batter. It's just a batter. The Yesh Machmir says no, it has to be. If it's not a pourable batter, even if it's a cake-like batter, it's hamoitzi gomer. That's what this opinion says. The The same, let's talk about lachmanis, which was the first type of food that we mentioned. Who belila rakiyos medai. Lachmanis also was a horrible batter. This opinion says, who cares about names? This opinion says, all I care is about one thing. If it's very thin, then it's mezainis, but if it's kvi yisuda, it's hamoitzi. If it's porable, then it's mezainis and kvi yisuda hamoitzi. When it's both, then it's, sorry, I'm saying it wrong. Yeah, no. This opinion says that if it's either pourable or thin, then it's hamoitzi and Birkas Hanehnin. That's what they say. If it's both, again I've said it wrong. If it's either pourable or thin, then it's mezainis and alamicha, and if it's a kvi yisuda, then it's hamoitzi. If it's both, it's also mezainis and Birkas Hanehnin and kvi yisuda hamoitzi. That's what this opinion says. The first opinion was no. If it's both pourable and thin, it's always mezainis. V'toiv lachash l'devreihem shaloi lechel ki metoich hasuda. Now the Rebbe says, don't eat anything. According to this opinion, even if you're not eating kvi yisuda, even eating less than the kvi yisuda, you should eat it in a meal, because it could be it's already going to be hamoitzi, unless it's very pourable or thin. It looks like we have to stop. Next week, Hashem, and the week after, there won't be a shiur. But afterwards, we're going to start the hot topic of Fasav Abba Kisma Mezainis bread.